أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم.
Alhamdulillah, last week we covered many aspects of ghusl. We covered what is fard in ghusl, the sunan of ghusl, the adab, the etiquettes of ghusl, and what makes ghusl fard necessary upon someone. Just a few clarifications from last week. We mentioned that there were three fara'id of ghusl, three things that are fard in ghusl. The first two we mentioned was, number one, putting water in the mouth. Gargling was mentioned. Second was putting water in the nose. So just a clarification that it's not necessary to do it 3 times. 1 time will suffice. And also, the gargling, scholars mentioned that you should gargle the water as a precaution to make sure that water reaches every portion of the mouth. The gargling part is also not necessary. If a person just merely puts water in their mouth, moves it around in their mouth, and he makes sure that every portion of his mouth, the water reaches every portion of his mouth, then that one fard act will be fulfilled. It's not necessary to gargle. Scholars mention the gargling part as a precaution. Right? They say as a precaution it's better to gargle the water, but it's not necessary to gargle the water. And also, 1 time is fard, not 3 times. Second point that was mentioned was putting water in the nose. That also 1 time is fard, not 3 times. And last week a question was asked that some people, when they're putting water in their nose, or when they take the water in a scoop and just sniff it up and put it in their nose, some people feel uncomfortable doing that. So the question was asked, as a substitute, can one just take his finger, which has water on it, which is wet, and use that to clean out his nostrils? The answer to that is, it will be permissible so long as when one is cleaning out his nostrils, at least one drop of water has to come out from the nostril. Because if a person is just taking a wet finger and cleaning out his nostrils, but 1 drop doesn't fall out, then that won't really be considered washing, that will be considered wiping. So if I take a wet hand and I wipe it over my right hand and I wipe it over the outside of my left hand, then that will just be wiping it. But now if I keep doing it over and over again until 1 drop falls from that, then that won't be considered wiping, that will be considered washing. So similarly for the nose, as a substitute for putting water in the nose, you could just wet your finger and clean out your nostril with your finger. But you have to make sure that 1 drop of water falls out in order for it to be considered washing. These are the clarifications. And also one other thing, that if a person forgets to wash the mouth, a person forgets to put water in the nose, there is a hadith of Ibn Abbas which mentions that he should perform wudu and wash the mouth and wash the nose, clean the nose. But the scholars mentioned that it won't be necessary to repeat that with the wudu. It'll suffice that if a person performs ghusl and then afterwards he realizes that he forgot to put water in his mouth, he forgot to put water and clean his nose, then it won't be necessary to do those acts along with wudu. He could just put water in it right afterwards, after he takes a shower, then he remembers that I didn't wash my mouth and I didn't put water in my nose. He could just put water in his mouth right after that and clean his nose, put water in his nose, and the ghusl will be fulfilled. The fara'id of the ghusl will be fulfilled. Yes?
Is there a time limit?
No.
What if he he does one part of ghusl, but then he doesn't do the gargling in the water, and then he bleeds or something? Then should he? I know he has to do wudu. But what about the ghusl part?
The ghusl part? I'm not sure about that. I'll find out about that. Another clarification. And also, the question was asked last week about in regards to madhi, the free seminal fluid. What was the ruling in regards to that? What type of impurity is that? So that impurity will be at the same level as the impurity of blood, meaning if there is an amount of blood on your cloth equal to a dirham is, for example, the 50-cent coin. If it's equal to that amount, then it must be washed off and salat cannot be prayed with that on the clothes. Similarly is the case with madhi, the pre-seminal fluid. If there is that amount on the clothes, which is equal to a 50-cent coin, a dirham and a 50-cent coin is approximately the same size, then a person cannot pray salat with those clothes. He has to make sure that he washes that part off. These are just some clarifications to be made.
Does Maulana, does that apply for like urine also, for example?
Yes, for urine as well. Today we'll be discussing water. Which types of water can a person make wudu from? What is considered as ma'un kathir, a lot of water, what is considered as a small portion of water. This is important to know because there are different rulings in regards to whether impurity falls in those. If there's a small container of water and impurity falls on it, then what's the ruling? If there's a huge reservoir, if there's a huge pool and water or impurity falls in it, then what's the ruling for that? So it differs according to the amount of water that's there. So today we'll be covering waters. One thing to know first and foremost, which water can you make wudu with? You can make wudu with rainwater, as it allowed, water of rivers, water from the wells, ocean water, all these types of water you're allowed to make wudu with. If there's snow and the snow melts, or if there's ice and the ice melts, you can make wudu with all these types of water. So it's obvious, it is clear. So now, one term that I'd like to bring our attention to is the term in Arabic, which is ma'un kathir, right? So just the transliteration. Ma'un kathir literally translates into a lot of water, right? So now, what is considered to be ma'un kathir, a lot of water? So the scholars, there are three statements of the scholars that are there, which they mention is the standard for what's considered a lot of water. The first statement that's mentioned is if a person moves one portion of the water, one side of the water, and the other side of that water doesn't move through him moving it. For example, if a person has a container of certain size, and on the right side of the container he takes water and he begins moving it, or he just takes a scoop of water. They say if the water on the left side doesn't move through him taking a scoop of water, then that will be considered as a lot of water. That will be considered ma'un kathir. So if he moves or takes a scoop of water from one side and the other side of water doesn't move, then this will be considered as ma'un kathir, meaning a lot of water, a large body of water. So this is the first one. Again, just to repeat it, the first is that if he moves or takes a scoop of water from one side and the other side of water doesn't move, then this will be considered a large body of water, ma'un kathir. The second statement of scholars, they mention that if there is a reservoir, the water is such that it is 10 by 10, the term used in Arabic is zira', right? 10 zira', and zira' is 18 inches. So just to make it easier for us, 5 yards by 5 yards, 15 feet by 15 feet. If the water is in such a place, and the measurement of that place is 15 feet by 15 feet, then that will be considered to be a large body of water. So that's the second, right? If the water is 15 feet by 15 feet. But now, the opinion which is taken by the scholars, the most preferable opinion, is that if a person with sound intellect and piety, he considers it to be a large body of water, he sees a certain amount of water, now he considers that, okay, this is ma'un kathir, this is a large body of water. According to him, he's convinced that this is a large body of water, then that will be considered as ma'un kathir, a large body of water. So this is subjective. But it has to be a person who, they say in Arabic, aqlun salim, right? A sound intellect.
Maulana?
Yes.
So for number 2, 15 feet by 15 feet, that's 5. What, isn't there one more dimension? 15 by 15.
Yeah, the water. Oh, yeah. There's another thing that I need to mention is the depth of the water should be such that if a person scoops the water, the bottom of the container or whatever the water is held in should not be visible. So if it's something which is only, for example, a few inches high, that when you take the scoop of water, the earth or whatever, the bottom of that container or whatever the water is held in, it becomes visible through that, then that won't be considered ma'un kathir, right? The depth of the water should be such. That is the standard for determining whether or not the water has a depth to be considered a large body of water. So again, these are three statements that are mentioned. The most preferred is the third one, right? Which if a person himself, he sees a body of water and he's convinced that this is ma'un kathir, this is a large body of water. So now, what if an impurity falls in water? So since this is the standard, yes.
Sorry, when we're talking about sound intellect, we're not just talking about someone who's mentally stable, correct? This is someone who have to have proper Islamic knowledge. Because, I mean, anyone can technically say, like, hey, you know, they might not consider the fact of the depth of the water, for example. They may be stable or mentally sound intellect.
Yes, that would come into play. That you have to know, for example, that there are certain conditions, there's certain rulings in regards to the water. That there has to be, the depth has to be a certain amount, or the length has to be a certain amount. So through that estimation, that will be considered as a person who has sound intellect. Yes, that's correct. Now again, regarding impurities. So now, since we've established that this is the standard for a large body of water, anything less than that will be considered ma'un qaleel, a small body of water. So now, if an impurity, any type of impurity falls in a small body of water, it doesn't matter the size of that impurity, whether it is a little or whether it is a lot, that water would automatically become impure, and a person cannot perform wudu with that water. So if you have a glass of water and an impurity falls in that water, even if it's a small amount, that glass of water, a person cannot perform wudu with that. Why? Because that is classified as ma'un qaleel, a small body of water. Now, flowing water is different. Flowing water, even if it's something that we might look at and say that this is not a large body of water, if it's just constantly flowing. Now, what's considered flowing water? The scholars mentioned that a person does not use the same portion of water twice. So now, if there's just stagnant water in a container, and I take a scoop of water and I wash my face, and then I go and I take another scoop. The scoop that I took the first time, it's from that same body of water. Again, I used it twice. But flowing water is such that if I, for example, take a scoop of water and wash my face, and that water has flowed and has moved on, now there's a new body of water that I'm taking the second scoop. That's considered flowing water. So now if there's flowing water and impurity falls in that water, as long as there's no effect of the impurity that can be visible on the water, then that water will be pure. So as long as, for example, the impurity doesn't cause the color of the water to change. So now there's urine that falls in water, flowing water, and now that flowing water, the color changes, right? Or the smell of it changes, right? If these qualities change, then that water will be considered to be impure.
Now, what if it's not an impurity? What if you drop something like I don't know,
Pure,
like
right?
yeah, like
We'll
let's say you
come up to that.
okay.
We'll come up to that. Again, now what if there's like a big pond or a reservoir or a pool, right? As we mentioned, say for example 15 feet by 15 feet. There's that much. And now there's impurity that falls on one side of it. Again, if it's an impurity that is not visible after it falls into it, for example, like some urine falls into it, a big pond, then you could make wudu from any side of that pond, any side of that reservoir. All four sides of it you can make wudu from. If it's an impurity that doesn't become visible after it falls in it. But if it's visible after it falls in it, say for example like a dead dog falls inside one side of a pond, for example, then you can't make wudu from that specific side. Say for example there are four sides. If a dead dog falls on this side, you can't make wudu from this side of the water. You can make wudu from the other three sides. But then again, if the impurity can't be visible, there's some drops of urine that fall on this side and then doesn't become visible after that, you could still make wudu from that side. You can make wudu from any of the four sides. And then now, what if a pure substance mixes with the water? What is the ruling of that? So, if a pure substance mixes with water, wudu is allowed, but there's a condition: as long as that pure substance doesn't overpower the water. Now, what do we mean by that? That it changes the density or the liquidity of the water. That the water is not thin anymore, it doesn't remain thin, the water becomes thick. So if a little bit of soap falls in the water, and that little amount is such that it's not changing the thinness of the water or the essence of the water is still thin, right? Then making wudu from that body of water will be allowed, that portion of water will be allowed. And now if a person puts a large amount of soap in the water, now the essence of the water changes and it overpowers the water, now the water becomes thick, the water will be pure, but you can't attain purity through that water. You can't make wudu with that water. So as long as it doesn't overpower the water. And that means it changes the liquidity of the water.
And that's different from putting the soap on yourself, correct?
What do you mean by that?
Meaning, like, let's say if you're about to start wudu, and let's say you just had food and you want to wash your hands, the oils off your hands, you rub soap into your hands, and then you start your wudu. The water hasn't been.
Oh, that's fine.
That's okay.
As,
There's no barrier.
So, yeah, there's no barrier. That's the main thing. Now, what if something has been cooked in water? If you place something in water and now it's been boiled or it's been cooked, then again, if it changed the color or the taste of the water, then wudu cannot be performed from this water. But if something is boiled in the water, you put some substance in the water to be boiled, but now it purifies that substance, you can make wudu from that water. The example I was given is they say berry leaves. Berry leaves is something which they put in water. I'm not sure if they do this now, but you put berry leaves in water and they boil it, and they use that water to do ghusl of the deceased, of the dead person. So when you put the berry leaves in the water, it doesn't change the essence of the water, where now it makes the water thick, or it changes, the color of the water now. So if it's something like that, which the water doesn't change, rather the substance becomes purified through being put in the water, then wudu will be allowed through that, right? These are just a few important points to note when it comes to water. Do we have time for tayammum, or should we?
Yeah.
I won't cover everything about tayammum, just some basic parts. We'll continue. We're not going to be able to finish it today. We'll finish it next time. So now tayammum, firstly you need to be understood that tayammum is a substitute for wudu. Tayammum, when wudu, the asl, the original form of attaining purity is not available, the water is not available, that's when you turn towards tayammum. If you have water available, then you're not going to go towards tayammum, right? In some conditions you do, but I'll explain that. So now, if there is no water available within a 1 mile radius, right, and a person doesn't have wudu, then tayammum will be permissible for him. Now, if a person meets someone and that person tells him that there is water available and it's within a 1 mile radius, and he tells him that there's water available in a certain part of the town, then if he trusts that person, then it will be necessary for him to go out and search for that water, right? And search for it in a way which doesn't cause him any type of harm or inconvenience, right? And we mentioned certain situations where there is water available, but now due to the circumstances, he can make tayammum. Tayammum will be permissible for him, right? So if somebody tells him that, for example, there's water nearby within a 1 mile radius, and again, that person, he trusts him. He says, okay, this person seems like a trustworthy person. So now he has to go and search for the water, right? He can't just say, I'm not going to search for the water, we just do tayammum. It's necessary for him to go and search for the water. Then if after searching he doesn't find water, then in that scenario, tayammum will be permissible for him. Now, if due to an illness, a person cannot use water, water is harmful for him, then tayammum will be allowed. Right? If a person has some type of illness and wudu or ghusl, him using the water for wudu or ghusl will increase the illness, or it will delay the recovery from that illness, then tayammum will be permissible.
Does it have to be like a severe illness, or like
Yes.
say you have a cold and it's like
No, just a mere cold or a headache, that won't cover. It has to be a severe type of illness. Again, due to some illness, water is harmful to the person. Despite water being available for wudu, an adequate amount of water being available for wudu or being available for ghusl, but due to this illness, he can't use the water. It'll increase the illness or it'll delay the recovery for the illness. Then you could perform tayammum. Yes.
And just to make it clear to everyone, and just as a clarification, this is an understood fact that it has to be declared harmful by a doctor, not self-diagnosed.
Yes.
Right? It's not something that I think is.
Yes, if a doctor tells him that you can't use the water, or you could say a person himself really feels, he has a strong feeling that through using this water, that my illness will severely, like he's already severely ill, and now he knows himself that he will become even more sick, it will be more severe if he uses the water. In that scenario, then will be permissible. Then again, it will be best to have a doctor tell him that, for example, you can't use the water for wudu. You tell him, can I make wudu or can I make ghusl? If he says you can't, it will worsen the sickness, then you can perform tayammum.
How about some part, for some part he do the tayammum, and for some parts he do the wudu?
No, you can't do
Like
partial
if you
tayammum.
cannot wash your face.
That's the thing, there's 4 fara'id of wudu. If a person can't fulfill one of those due to some type of illness, the doctor declares that you can't wash this certain body part of yours due to this illness, due to this sickness, the sickness will increase. Then in that scenario, a person can do tayammum.
What if
Tayammum, that's what my question. Tayammum mix or just
No. You won't mix both of them. I'll clarify that. I mean,
I think an example would be, for example, if a person has a cast on.
the cast. Okay, if it's a cast, then a person can do masa on that part. My thing is, an illness that he has, a sickness, a disease that a person has, that through using water, that disease will not fester and it will increase. If it's like a cast that a person has on, like for example, he broke his arm and he has a cast on, then he'll do masa of that portion.
now the cast would cover the entire arm? What if you have a situation where, since the arm is one of the fara'is of wudu, if you, let's say, get stitches on a part of the arm, and you can do you can wet most of the arm except, let's say, 10% because it's covered with one of those band-aids, right?
Okay.
In that situation, would you do masa on that part and wet the rest of the arm, or would
I'm not sure about that. I'll find out.
Okay.
So we'll just cover this and then we'll finish off. What can you do tayammum with? Just to make it easier, just the general universal rule. So in the Quran, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, فَتَيَمَّمُوا صَعِيدًا طَيِّبًا. He says, perform tayammum, and perform tayammum with what? He says, pure soil, right? So now the scholars deduce from this that matter which neither burns in fire nor melts, this possesses the qualities of the earth. So making tayammum with these will be permissible, it will be allowed. Some examples of this: soil, right? Soil is mentioned, sand, there's some types of stone, right? Limestone, for example, that's there. Brick dust, even if it's a baked brick, you can use that as well. Concrete, I believe, also falls under that. So that matter would neither burn in fire nor melts, right? This is these two qualities have to be there, right? This will be considered to possess the qualities of the earth, and you can perform tayammum with this. So now, what does this rule out? Gold, silver, copper, right? These melt. If you place them under fire, then they'll melt. Clothing, if you melt them, then they'll turn into ash, right? So you can't perform tayammum with these objects. Now, if something which you cannot perform tayammum on, if it gathers dust, if there's dust that is gathered on it, and it is so much dust that a person cannot perform tayammum, right? So when he strikes it, that certain object, that certain material which has that type of dust, there will be a lot of dust which ends up on his hands, and you could perform tayammum with that. So there's a piece of clothing, and now there's a lot of dust, right? And the dust from what? Those materials which you can perform tayammum, say brick dust, for example, right? And it gathers on the piece of cloth, and there's a lot, it's not just a little, there's a lot of it on the cloth, and a person can perform tayammum with that.
So you can't do it like a tree, right? Like a tree?
No. Wood, all these things, they burn. Like, there's no material in this room right now. The wall is plaster, you can burn, it can melt. The bench is over here, right? The carpet, you can't do tayammum with any of these materials, right? So that's not allowed.
Unless it has a lot of dust.
Yes, unless it gathers, right, a lot of dust from those materials which tayammum is allowed with. Again, or next, clay pots, right? Tayammum on clay pots, that's also allowed. You're allowed to do it so long as it's not painted. They don't paint over the clay pot, or there's no writing on the clay pot, because that now creates a barrier between the material, between your hand and the material, right? So now, what if there's a piece of stone, right? There's a material which you can perform tayammum on, but there's no dust on it. So it's not necessary that there has to be dust on it. So if a person, there's a big brick and there's absolutely no dust on it, then it's allowed, you can perform tayammum on it. Why? Because it falls under this category, right? It falls under the material which cannot be burnt by fire, right? Cannot be melted. That will be all for today. Next week, inshallah, we'll discuss how to perform the tayammum. We'll discuss the sunnah of tayammum and what breaks the tayammum. Next week I will be here. Tomorrow I'll be leaving to Chicago, so I won't be here next week. So in 2 weeks, inshallah, we will continue and we will do the discussion on tayammum, a further discussion on tayammum.
Sunday question.
Huh? Oh yeah, Sunday, very important. We will have a program, inshallah. After Maghrib, this one? Is it?
Yes.
After Maghrib, yes, it will be after Maghrib. Inshallah, Maulana Zubair, I don't know if he landed, he probably landed right now, coming from Chicago for just a few days. So inshallah, Sunday we'll have a program here in the masjid after Maghrib. The title of the program is The Role of a Believer, right? So brothers are requested to come and join the program. Sundays are day off. Right? Spread the word, tell some of our family members, our cousins, or other family members, our parents or uncles. Tell them to come in, inshallah, they will benefit from the program, and food will be served, right?
Yes.
Yes, inshallah, food will be served in the program. Anybody have any questions?
Yeah. For the impurities, if it falls in still water, right?
Stagnant.
Stagnant water. What is the ruling for them?
Then the water becomes impure.
Whether it's big or
it doesn't matter the size of the impurity. If it's small, if it's a small body of water and it's stagnant and it's not flowing, any type of impurity that falls, doesn't matter the quantity, the water will become impure. You can have
about a pond, the still pond.
Which pond?
Like a still pond.
Again, it depends on the method or the opinion that's preferred. That's subjective, but again, it's a person who has sound intellect and piety, right? If you are acquainted with the rulings in regards to the water, one statement that was mentioned of the scholars is that 15 feet by 15 feet. So that's a huge pond. So now if a person sees that, of course, obviously he'll say that this is a large body of water.
Even though
So
it's
now,
still.
yes, even though it's still,
Yeah.
that's a large body of water. So if an impurity falls in that,
It doesn't
then
make the
as
whole
long
thing
as
impure.
it doesn't make the whole thing impure, right? As long as the effect of that najasat is not apparent on the water, where now the color of it changes. Now the body of water, that whole body of water, the color of it changes due to the najasat that fell in there. You could make wudu with that water. It's permissible.
And for the pond, ponds are usually not clean, obviously, right? Because ponds are still bodies of water. They usually have like algae growing in it and moss and things like that. So
those things which can't be separated from the water, like for example moss and these things,
Yeah.
you could still make wudu with that
is
water.
it just so you would, in that situation, you just do the 4 faraid of the wudu, or
Yeah, if you want to do just the 4 fard, you can do that.
Okay.
Because
Because
the
then
water
you-
that's available, if there's moss on the water, then the scholar
Yeah, but-
mentioned you could do wudu with that water.
because you can also run risk of like taking
Yeah.
in germs and things like that, right? Yeah.
In the pond, you see that there are a lot of fish, in the pond, and you see the smelling, the fish, so you can, you eat
Yes, that's fine.
Fine, right?
If it's a large body of water.
Dead fish is not impure, right?
No, yeah, that's another thing. Animals which live in the water, if they die in the water, then that's fine. It doesn't pollute the water or anything, right? Animals which are born and they live in the water. Right? Similarly, animals which don't have flowing, or insects that don't have flowing blood, like mosquitoes, if they end up dying and falling into the water, then it doesn't pollute the water.
This is a samak only, or this is any?
Any animal which is born in the water and lives in the water. So you have some turtles that are born and live in the water. If they die in the water, and they just remain in the water, they end up bloating up. It's not going to pollute the water.
If you smell the fish, that fish, that sometimes, mostly, I think the fish, they
Yeah, it doesn't matter because they mentioned that the fish is born and it lives in the water, so there's no, it doesn't pollute the water.
What about amphibians, like for example, a frog or?
Yes, frogs. They mentioned a distinction. How you can tell between the distinction of land frogs and water frogs. They say the water frogs, they have webbed feet, and land frogs, they don't have webbed feet. So that's how you could be able to distinguish between those two.
What?
So if the webbed feet,
Webbed.
water frogs, they have webbed feet, and land frogs, they don't have webbed feet. So for example, you end up finding like a dead frog in the water. So you can see by the feet, if it has webbed feet, then that's not going to pollute the water. But if it doesn't, then that type of animal will pollute the water, since it doesn't live in the water, right? And again, animals which live in the water, but later on they live outside, like ducks, for example. If they die, and then they die in the water, then the water, I read this, I'm not sure if they said it was impure. I'm pretty sure that they said that the water will be impure. I have to double check, but I'm pretty sure that they said that the water will be impure. Yes?
So if, for example, let's say you take a wudu with the water that's impure, but you don't find out until after you're done. So how would that go about? And you don't have no more water, that's the only water you have.
Then you will perform tayammum. If you perform wudu with water that's impure,
Yeah.
and you find out later on that, okay, this water that I performed the wudu with
You haven't
was impure,
done any actions yet, like create a salat, or
Oh.
you just, yeah.
you do tayammum. If there's no water available and the
Yeah.
water that you used for wudu is impure, then you'll do tayammum.
So tayammum will cover the impurity that you took in while you're doing wudu.
Yes, I will.
So let's say someone tells you there's water available in the 1 mile radius, or even if you know that there's water, but you fear that the time it will take for me to go there, the time will already like be done. So then what should I do?
In that scenario,
Should I
I'll
just
find out.
should I just do like the tayammum and then make it up later with water?
I'm not sure. I'm not sure the ruling in Marshall.
So for tayammum, we have to carry at the time the, ball of the, like soil.
It's not necessary to do that. You could maybe you could find it in certain areas.
Yeah.
You know, as I mentioned, if it falls under this category, if you find material that falls under this category, sometimes like stone, for example, or
Soil,
concrete,
yeah.
these type of things you can perform that.
Somebody said, they always carry the, soil in the, like a wooden, like a pot, like a clean
Yeah.
soil. This is okay, right?
That's okay. If there's no water available, then the person can perform tayammum with that.
Maulana Sahib, is there any distinction between like sweet water and salt water?
No, the ocean water, you could say it's salty, right?
Yeah.
So you can still perform wudu with that type of water.
Okay,
Doesn't matter.
like a fresh river and if I
doesn't matter.
and does an
Like
ocean.
the river and the ocean water, it doesn't matter if you taste it and it's sweet or you taste it and it's salty, you can still make wudu with that type of
Okay.
water. Yes. Any other questions, brothers? Khair, inshallah. Jazakallah khair for your time, brothers. And inshallah, in 2 weeks, not next week, but in 2 weeks, we will continue with the discussion of Tayammum.